Hey guys, it's Aman from Our Rich Journey, and today I am going to be answering your questions about investing in real estate here in Portugal. Last week we went to our Instagram followers and we asked them, what questions do you have about buying a home here in Portugal? And in less than 24 hours, we got over 150 questions about the house buying process, about real estate, about our thoughts on the golden visa, on the direction of the real estate market, everything that had to do with buying a home here in Portugal, we got in those questions. And so in today's video, I am going to try to answer as many of those questions as possible. A lot of the questions were similar, so we should be able to get through a good deal of them, or I should be able to include them in other responses. But I'm gonna dedicate this video to answering those questions. And as I answer those questions about real estate, I am gonna answer them here at our Portugal Villa, one of the Airbnbs that we own here in Portugal. I'm gonna answer some questions here in the rumpus room, some out in the backyard, some upstairs. I'll move around the villa. Right now, we're in between stays, and this is before the new guests arrive, but we're gonna have some fun with the video today. So the first question I wanna answer is one that we received in various forms, but essentially people wanted to know whether or not foreigners can buy property here in Portugal. Do you have to be an EU resident or a Portuguese resident to buy property in Portugal? And the answer is no, you do not have to be a resident of the EU or a resident of Portugal to buy property in Portugal. Foreigners can buy property in Portugal without any restrictions, except if that property is in certain areas like nature reserves. Other than that, there are no restrictions on foreigners buying land or property here in Portugal. Now, along these lines, people had questions about whether or not you needed a visa to buy property here in Portugal if you're a foreigner. Well, if you don't have EU residency and if you're not a Portuguese resident, you can only stay in Portugal for up to 90 days. And so you don't need a visa to buy property, but if you want to stay in that property for longer than 90 days, you need to obtain a visa. Now, there are many ways to obtain a visa to stay in Portugal on a permanent basis. In fact, we think Portugal is one of the most welcoming countries in the EU, and so they make obtaining a visa a relatively straightforward and easy process. The next question people had was whether or not it was necessary to hire a real estate agent when looking for property here in Portugal. And the answer is no. There are ways to buy property here in Portugal that involve not even getting a real estate agent involved. Now, what we do recommend you do is when you do finally find a property that you are interested in, that you get an attorney involved in that process. You see, an attorney can do the due diligence that is required to make sure that you are buying a property that is free and clear of debt, that is completely owned by the person selling it to you, and they can do a lot of the due diligence that you really need to have done before you purchase a property here in Portugal. Now, a real estate agent can help you with some of those things. But Christina and I have a very unique strategy when it comes to buying property here in Portugal. We actually don't rely on one agent because agents here in Portugal, they can only see so many pieces of property. And so for us, when we are looking for real estate, we use multiple agents and we also use multiple other resources that involve buying directly from the owner, buying directly from banks, or even buying tax lien properties. And when we do some of these other strategies, we don't use a real estate agent at all. But with all of those strategies, we always use an attorney to help us do our due diligence. The next question that we got a lot of was whether or not foreigners can get a mortgage to buy a property here in Portugal. And the answer is yes. Buying a property here in Portugal and obtaining a mortgage is just like obtaining a mortgage as you would if you lived in the United States. The process is relatively the same. Now, there are primarily two types of mortgages that foreigners get when they're buying property here in Portugal. The first is a mortgage for a resident. Now, this type of mortgage is the same type of mortgage that a Portuguese citizen would get. But as a foreigner, if you are considered a tax resident, you can also qualify for this type of resident mortgage. Now, a resident mortgage usually has better terms and a lower down payment than the other type of mortgage that I'm about to talk about. And so with a resident mortgage, you can qualify for lower down payments and lower interest rates. Now you can obtain these mortgages by going directly to a bank that does mortgages or by using a mortgage broker. Now the second type of mortgage is a non-resident mortgage. Now this type of mortgage requires a higher down payment, and usually the interest rates are a little bit higher than a resident mortgage. And we've talked to lots of expats that have gotten this type of mortgage. And they usually have to get these types of mortgages because they haven't obtained their full residency here in Portugal and have filed taxes to be considered a tax resident of Portugal. Now, some of the things about these mortgages is that they usually require you to put down at least 30% to buy the home. And 30% is a significant down payment. And so what we usually recommend is that if you plan on moving to Portugal and staying here as a permanent resident, first obtain that tax residency before you go look for a mortgage, because it could mean the difference between putting as little as 10% down versus putting down as much as 30%. If you guys have been following our real estate journey, you know that we decided not to get mortgages, and instead we were able to buy all of our homes cash here in Portugal. Now, this was our preference because we really wanted to avoid a lot of the fees and some of the restrictions that come along with getting a mortgage here in Portugal. You see, there are certain things that are a little quirky. One thing in particular is that the fees for these mortgages can be kind of high. The other thing is that they have certain penalties if you prepay these mortgages. So let's say you don't want to keep the mortgage for the full 20, 30, or 40 years. Instead, you want to pay that mortgage off earlier. There is a penalty for paying that mortgage off earlier. Some other major unique things about Portuguese mortgages is that one, you are required to get life insurance if you obtain a mortgage from a bank. Two is that mortgages have restrictions based on your age. If you surpass a certain age, you can no longer qualify for certain mortgages. And if you get close to that age, the amount of time that you can borrow is also limited based on your age. Now, mortgages in Portugal are usually 30 to 40-year mortgages. And one of the questions that we got a lot of was, what do interest rates look like on those mortgages? Well, interest rates relative to places like the United States, interest rates here in Portugal are very low. In fact, mortgages right now in Portugal are ranging anywhere from 2 to 4%. Now, mortgages are going up because interest rates, just like they are in the US, are also going up here in Portugal. Now, one of the things that we've heard from so many expats that have moved here and that have obtained a mortgage was that they were pleasantly surprised with the process. And this brings us to the next question that we received a lot of. What type of documentation is required when you are applying for a mortgage as a foreigner? So the banks are gonna wanna see a credit report from whatever country you're from. So if you're an American, they're gonna wanna see your US credit report. The next thing is that they are also gonna pull a Portuguese credit report. Now, some of you may not have any credit or have done any transactions here in Portugal, but it's gonna be something that they still pull. They're gonna wanna see 3 to 6 months worth of bank statements and proof of income. And they're gonna wanna see proof of residence, either here in Portugal or from whatever country you are from. Now, as I mentioned earlier, depending on the type of mortgage that you're applying for, if you're applying for a resident mortgage or a non-resident mortgage, the terms of those mortgages are really going to be dictated by all of this information that you are providing. And so, again, if you have the option of waiting to apply for these mortgages, once you obtain residency, you could be looking at a lot better terms than if you are applying before you have Portuguese residency. But with all of this information, the banks will look at it and they can give you a pre-approval letter for you to start looking at homes. All right, so welcome to the backyard of our Portugal villa. And I just love this enclosed backyard. The privacy that's back here is just amazing. So let's get to the next question. The next question has to deal with closing costs and expenses when you're buying a home here. And people have asked, how much money should they be setting aside for this? And you're gonna need about 10% of the purchase price in cash in order to pay for some of those things like taxes, fees, and expenses when it comes to buying a home here. The next question you guys have had is about the process for purchasing a home. What is the process and how long that usually takes? Now, the process typically involves making an offer, signing a promissory contract, paying a deposit, and completing the purchase at a notary office. Now, this whole thing can take 2 to 3 months. And one thing that we have learned as we've gone through this process a couple times already is that buying a home here in Portugal takes time and patience. You see, just finding a home, that process alone took us over a year to find our first property. And it wasn't that we weren't finding good properties. It's just that we would get so far along the process and hit a major hiccup or something strange would happen and we would have to pull out of the deal. Now, 3 months may sound like a long time, but the majority of that time is actually spent compiling paperwork, doing the due diligence, doing your surveys, making sure that the piece of property that you are buying has everything in order. Now, I want to say something about the due diligence process. So many foreigners need to take this process very, very seriously. You know, as we were looking for properties here in Portugal, there were several properties that we were on the verge of buying but had to back out because once we did the due diligence, we found some serious non-starters. And I'll give you an example. There was one property that we had found that was at the foot of a lake. It was a beautiful property that was really self-sufficient because it had its own well water. We were going to set up solar. We could live at this property virtually off-grid. It had a septic system already in place. It was going to be a great property. But as we did more due diligence, we found that the boundaries weren't clearly defined. There were structures on this property that were illegally built that were going to be required to be brought up to code or either torn down. And so for this particular property, we had to back out. But this was not the only property that we had issues like this on. In fact, there were several other properties that had similar issues. Either it was the property line or there were illegal structures, things weren't to code that required us to back out of it. And so you'll find that as you're going through this process of looking for properties here in Portugal, it is so important that you do your due diligence. And it's one of the reasons that we stress it's so important for you to get an attorney involved, a local attorney involved to help you with the home buying process here in Portugal if you are a foreigner. All right, so now let's move on to the next set of questions, which I like to call the real estate investor questions. We have so many of you that have been following our journey, our investment journey here in Portugal, and you have lots of questions about whether or not Airbnb is still viable here, what parts of Portugal are still good areas to invest in. And so let's just answer the overall question that people have about where are there still good places to invest in Portugal. Now, people love to buy real estate in Lisbon, in Porto, in the Algarve. But Christina and I, we are fans of the Silver Coast. And the Silver Coast is becoming a very popular place for people to invest in real estate. We think that this particular area, there are a number of great opportunities, but we also think that those opportunities won't last for very long. But you know, Portugal has so many wonderful places with lots of opportunities. What it really comes down to is your overall strategy. Now, for a lot of people, their strategy has been doing short-term rentals, STRs. But you know, Portugal has been cracking down on short-term rentals recently on Airbnbs. There have been a number of laws that have made it prohibited in certain parts of Portugal or very, very difficult. You know, there's a ruling by the Supreme Court that recently went through where Airbnbs in apartment buildings are really in a gray area, no matter where the apartment building is, because of the nuisances that these Airbnbs can cause in apartment buildings. And I think that no matter where you're at in Portugal, if you are considering starting an Airbnb in an apartment building, you should be approaching that with a lot of concern because there are going to be some legal restrictions that are going to make it very difficult to do that, and that it's going to give more rights to the existing residents of that building to be able to protest any Airbnbs that are potentially coming into those buildings. So that's the first thing that I want to talk about, is that when you are investing here, you know, there are lots of opportunities, but have a strategy in place and make sure that whatever strategy that you are using, that it abides by the local laws and restrictions. So with that said, let's dig a little deeper into the short-term rental strategy, or my take on short-term rentals. Short-term rentals, for a very long time in Portugal, I think have been the way to go. But I think that the market in certain areas is becoming saturated. And laws are also in place that are going to be calling that strategy into question. But I think the future of this strategy is going to be shifting more towards midterm rentals. These are rentals that are going to be greater than 30 days, but probably less than 6 months. And it just has to do with how people are traveling. These days lately, there's more digital nomads, and people are coming in and staying for a bit longer, or they're transitioning from temporary housing into permanent housing. And so I think if you are interested in this type of strategy, a twist on a short-term strategy would be looking at a midterm strategy. And approaching it from a midterm strategy, you have less of the restrictions in place that could end up killing that strategy, and you could still get a good return on your investment. You won't be able to charge as much as you could have charged for a short-term rental, but you can certainly charge more than what you could have charged for a long-term rental. So if you're going to do the midterm rental strategy, take a look at that and approach it from a responsible standpoint. The next question that we received a lot of was about taxes. Now, I could dedicate an entire video about tax strategy when it comes to buying real estate here in Portugal, selling real estate, or collecting rents. But in general, you have to pay taxes on your real estate profits here in Portugal, whether or not it's from rents, from Airbnb income. If you are flipping homes, and the capital gains that you get from that, you're going to have to pay taxes on that. And the tax rate on capital gains and on rental income is 28%. Now, those rates do go up higher depending on other factors, but the flat rate is 28%. Now, we got lots of questions about property management, whether or not we use the property manager for our Airbnbs here in Portugal, and we do not use a property manager. Actually, we self-manage all of our properties, but we have everything automated, and so we're able to stay as hands-off as possible. But if you don't want to do that, if you prefer to farm that out, there are lots of property management companies here that can help manage your properties from afar. And they charge anywhere from 10% to as high as 50 to 60% of the income that you have coming into those properties. So it's really important that you do the research to find these properties, because they can provide a number of services when it comes to, you can hear the birds, but they can provide a number of services when it comes to property management. So that's why the rate varies so significantly. One other thing that you should be aware of is that if you choose to do a short-term rentals here in Portugal, run Airbnbs, that is considered a business. And so you have to get a business license. And along with running a business here in Portugal, you also have to hire an accountant. And so we give our tax information to our accountant every single month, and she does whatever she does. And at the end of the year, we also pay additional taxes on the income that we generate from our Airbnbs. So the tax rate that we pay is about 28%. And so if you guys are running those calculations to figure out whether or not it's feasible to start a real estate investment venture here, that's what you're looking at as far as taxes and property management. The next question we got a lot of was where we thought the real estate market was headed here in Portugal. And there have been so many significant changes taking place with real estate here in Portugal, because there has been a lot of protests about the affordability of housing here in Portugal. We did a whole video a couple weeks ago about the Golden Visa and our thoughts on the Golden Visa. In general, we think that it's a really great thing that the Golden Visa era is ending. And because of that, we think that values in Portugal are going to be tapered a bit because that Golden Visa program is going away. I say taper because I don't think prices are going to fall or crash because the Golden Visa has gone away. Because one thing that Portugal is struggling with, like a lot of other countries, is that there's a lack of supply and there's a great deal of demand locally and still internationally. You know, the crowd that was coming here to Portugal for the Golden Visa, maybe that crowd won't come here anymore, but there are still a significant number of people that want to move to Portugal because it's such a desirable place, and depending on where they're coming from, it's still relatively affordable. And so I don't think housing is going to crash because the Golden Visa program has gone away. Also, there is a great deal of demand locally. And so with real estate in Portugal, I think what's going to happen is that you are going to have kind of like these tiers of housing affordability, where you have homes of a price range over here, a certain range over here, and so on and so on. And so depending on the price range of home that you are looking in, there may be greater or less demand for that type of home. And so, for example, if you are looking for a starter home here in Portugal, around $100,000 up to $200,000, I think there's going to be a great deal of demand for those types of homes, because that's where the majority of people locally are looking for homes, and also the people that are coming from abroad are also looking to find homes like that, because for them that could be an exceptional deal. Now, the homes that are on the higher end, the homes that are above 300,000, 400,000, all the way up to $1 million, I think that those prices aren't going to be moving up as quickly as they were in the past, and I don't think the demand for those high-end homes is going to be where it used to be. And so the Golden Visa is definitely going to impact those homes, and I think it's going to be nice to see those values stop going up as high and maybe even come down. But if you're talking about some of the more starter homes, I see those prices as being stable. In fact, those are actually going to start to raise until we can get the supply back. So now let's talk about the next question that we got a lot of, and it has to do with building a house here in Portugal. Now, behind me is our little tiny house, which we had built by a local tiny house builder. But you guys aren't asking about tiny houses per se. You're asking about building a single family house here in Portugal and our thoughts on it. Now, a lot of people do this. A lot of Portuguese people have their homes built from scratch. A lot of foreigners come here, they buy land, and they build homes. But one of the things that you need to know before you embark on something like this is that you probably need to shift your expectations as far as how long something like this will take to get done and how much it may cost. Now, it's going to be a little bit more expensive than buying an existing home. And as far as timeline, building a new home in Portugal can take about 2 years to get done. And I know for a lot of people, that sounds like a very long time, but it is the typical time frame to build a house here in Portugal. And this is something that I think that if you're a foreigner and it's something that you're trying to do, I'll be absolutely honest with you, it's an ambitious thing to do, especially if you are brand new to Portugal. So my suggestion is that you find a builder that is extremely reputable, someone else that has also used them and can vouch for them. And when you do that, make sure that you actually look at the work that they've done for other people. We can drive around this neighborhood right now, and there's a ton of land in this neighborhood that people have built homes on. There's some beautiful brand new homes that have been built from scratch. But there are also many homes that were started and not completed. And I mean, we can literally go on like a 20-minute walk and we'll spot 5 or 6 homes that were started and not completed. Now, what's actually interesting about these homes that have been started and not completed is I think this presents an opportunity for someone that wants to build a home here in Portugal. So we've had several friends that have bought these lots of homes that the builder just pulled out on, or someone must have ran out of money. Anyway, the project wasn't complete, and we've had friends that have gone in and bought these sites, and they're able to actually reuse the housing plans, renew the permits, the construction permits and the design drawings, and then complete the project on their own. And some people have actually done the work themselves. They've been able to just really pick up where the builder left off and turn into a DIY project, or they've hired a new builder to complete the project, and they've gotten some great deals doing this. Now, if you are going to be moving to Portugal and maybe renting for a while, this is one of those things that we always talk about. once you live in an area for a while, you can get to know the area, you can meet people, you can find out whose house is that wasn't completely built. And are they willing to sell it? And so you might be able to find a great deal like that. It also gives you the opportunity to find a good, reputable builder. Now let's talk about the tiny house. Now, we get questions from you guys all the time about our Airbnb tiny house and how that's been going. And it has been amazing. We charge anywhere from $75 or 75 euro to 150 euro a night for the Airbnb. And right now is the low season, but it's still full about 50% of the time. This summer, we're expecting it to be full about 90% of the time. And so we've been making really good money, especially considered what we paid for the tiny house. Now, if you are interested in building a tiny house in Portugal, we recommend, if you don't have experience doing this, finding a good builder to also do this. The builder that we used, we actually don't share his name on YouTube, but we created a tiny house workbook. And in that workbook, we have information on all of the tiny house builders that are available here in Portugal. And you can have a tiny house built here in Portugal anywhere from about 25 to about 35,000 euro, which I think is an amazing deal when you look at what people are charging to build tiny houses in the US. So tiny houses in Portugal are a relatively new thing. You don't really see a lot of them around. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen another tiny house outside of the ones that our builder has built and that are at his shop. I've never been driving around and seen one. So when people see our tiny house, they're always like, they have a ton of questions. Like, what is it? Is it a house? Is it a trailer? Is it an RV? Well, tiny houses in Portugal are actually considered vehicles. Our tiny house is built on a trailer, and that trailer has a license plate. And so because of that, the rules and regulations that you would need to build a typical house don't apply completely when you're building a tiny house. Now, I'm not going to get into all of the details and differences. If you guys are interested in learning more about those types of things, maybe we'll dedicate an entire video to tiny houses. But I think tiny houses are a great alternative to housing here in Portugal, especially affordable housing, because being able to have a tiny house built like this for $25,000 to $35,000, I mean, it's a full-fledged house. It has full-size appliances. We don't have a washer and dryer in the tiny house, but we have space for a washer and dryer. We have 2 mezzanines that have 2 queen-size beds in them. So, the tiny house can sleep up to 4 to 6 people. We have a pull-out couch. It really feels like a roomy space, and we've had people come here, just to experience the tiny house living, and they said, wow, I could live here full time. People say that to us all the time. The other thing that's really great about tiny houses is that they're on wheels, and so you can move them around depending on the location. And I think, as an investment, the tiny house has been a great investment. And, Christina and I like investments like this for Airbnb. And we have some projects that are coming up that are going to be stays that focus more on the experience. You see, when you're in this tiny house, you're here mainly for this tiny house experience. I mean, to see what it's like to live in this type of situation. And so Christina and I are going to continue along that theme, not with another tiny house, but with another property that we put on Airbnb that allows people to experience something new and unique. And you see, I think that is the niche that a lot of you should be considering when you're talking about getting involved in Airbnb or short-term rentals. Because doing something like this can really set you apart from the competition. There are so many amazing things in Portugal to do and see, and having an Airbnb that complements that experience in Portugal, I think is going to be a great opportunity for a lot of people. And I'm talking about this because people ask us all the time, what's a good thing to invest in? What types of housing or what type of real estate is a good investment? And real estate, you can approach this in multiple ways. Think outside the box. You can be investing in tiny houses. You can be investing in Airstreams, in campsites. a number of different things that allow you to actually get a better return on your dollar and require you to invest less upfront to get started really as a real estate investor. So you guys actually had many more questions and we are just running out of time. We don't have enough time to answer all of those questions, but maybe we'll do a part 2 to this video. If you guys would like to see more videos like this, just dedicated to answering your questions about real estate here in Portugal, leave a comment below, ask more questions in the comments below, and maybe we'll do another video. Also, if you are interested in the process that we used to move to Portugal, to obtain a visa here in Portugal, if you want to learn more about real estate and in more detail, check out our Moving to Portugal course. I will leave a link to that in the description below. And as usual, if you guys have liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and join the journey.